A call for help shatters the night. From a paper recycling plant on the outskirts of Edmonton in October 1994, a frantic 911 message.
911, do you have an emergency?
Yes, we do. We have 2 fatalities. There's been 2 men electrocuted.
Okay.
2 men, James Dieter and Tim Oredzik, are found lying in a pool of blood. They have been dead for several hours. The RCMP officers called to the scene quickly agree it was electrocution, an unfortunate work accident. They couldn't have been more wrong. There were no flash burn marks. The power had been turned off, and there was blood everywhere. The police had somehow even missed 3 bullet holes in the head of each victim. It was only after an autopsy, 2 days later, that it dawned on the RCMP they had a double murder on their hands. But by then the crime scene had been completely destroyed, vital evidence was lost.
502.
Inspector Peter Waldarczyk helps run the Sherwood Park detachment of the RCMP, which handled the investigation. How could the Mounties miss bullet holes in the heads of the victims?
If there's a large amount of blood present and it's in the hair, unless it's a very close examination, you could miss it. There's no doubt about it. There was a mistake made.
But this was worse than a case of oops. We blew it. By this time, the crime scene was completely destroyed, and crucial evidence, if there was any, is gone.
I've spoken to the investigators, and they assure me that the loss of the crime scene, though it was damaging to the case, was not a critical factor in the case. And I accept their word.
Solving this case wasn't going to be easy. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, and the autopsy was done too late to pinpoint the time of death. But lack of evidence didn't stop the Mounties from coming up with a motive, a love affair gone sour, and a suspect they would pursue with a blind zeal and determination. That man was Jason Dix. He worked at a scales company that supplied equipment to the paper recycling plant, and he knew both victims. His ordeal began when he lied to police about an extramarital affair he was having with a coworker. A simple lie, but it would cost him dearly.
I was involved in an affair, and I did a bunch of lying and covering up the affair, so I could see how they could maybe take a closer look at me.
Did you ever think it would spiral out of control?
No, I didn't. Not even right when it was in the thickest part of it. I just kept telling myself I had absolutely nothing to do with this. The police will eventually sift through it all, and they will come to the same conclusion.
But the police came to the exact opposite conclusion. Dix had been drinking the night before with James Dieter, one of the victims. With them was the woman with whom Dix had been having a clandestine affair for 2 years, Lou Payette.
We started off as friends, a couple of drinks after work. One thing led to another, and we ended up having an affair together.
And in that period, any ultimatums from you?
I had definitely given him an ultimatum. Leave your wife or leave me. Make a decision.
Here was a motive for the RCMP, fear and jealousy. As the night wore on, police say, Jason Dix became murderously jealous of Dieter, frightened that Lou Payette had told Dieter about their affair, and worried that Dieter would tell his wife. Payette later told police Dix was ice-cold angry when they left the bar, and she wouldn't sleep with him until he left his wife. From there, the police concluded, a jilted and enraged Dix drove to the paper plant the next morning, found James Dieter, and executed him. He also killed Tim Oredzik, simply because he got in the way. And it all happened sometime around noon. A neat, tidy theory. But where was the evidence? First, there was a problem with motive. Lou Payette told the police Dix wasn't the jealous type, and she insisted she never told Dieter about the affair. Did James Dieter know about the affair that you and Jason Dix were having?
Not to my knowledge at all. No, I certainly didn't tell him.
Lou Payette says that Dieter went to his grave never knowing about the affair.
I can't comment on that.
And Jason Dix says openly his wife knew about the affair.
I have to take his word for it.
The wife knew about the affair, and James Dieter didn't and couldn't tell her. Then your motive doesn't make sense.
Well, to us it made sense.
What made even less sense was the detective's conclusion on the time of death. All indications suggest that the men were killed before 11 a.m., when Jason Dix could not have been anywhere near the plant. James Dieter and Timo Redzik had gone to work around 8 a.m. to repair the baler. Their colleagues would later testify the photos of the crime scene indicated they were only about an hour and a half to 2 hours into their job when they were killed. That would have been around mid-morning. Around 10, the wife of one of the men called the plant. Stephanie Redzik, Tim's wife, remembers speaking to both him and James Dieter.
I called him approximately 10 o'clock. I could be off by 10 minutes. And we used the family code, which is ring 3 times, hang up, and ring again. James answered. And so I talked with James for a couple of seconds, and then I talked with Tim.
That was the last time anyone spoke to them. The factory had a special loudspeaker system for the phone. The baler was not working. There was little noise in the empty factory. Yet 3 calls from different family members went unanswered in the next hour. Stephanie Redzik called her husband again at 11, but this time there was no answer. Little wonder then that when the experts at the RCMP's Violent Crime Analysis Branch in Ottawa were asked to review all the evidence, they concluded the murders occurred between 10 and 11 a.m. But the local RCMP didn't think the unanswered phone calls were significant.
There's also the fact that they were working on a piece of equipment, they were away from the phone, and they might have chosen not to answer because they were engrossed in their work. I guess I'm just speculating, you have to understand that. But there's a variety of reasons why they could or couldn't answer the phone.
All the evidence originally pointed to the murders taking place between 10 and 11 a.m. And in fact, a top investigator who looked at all the evidence concluded precisely that.
I've never read his report, so I can't comment on that.
The Mounties knew they had a problem. Their prime suspect, Jason Dix, had a rock-solid alibi until well after that 10-11 a.m. window. He left home at 10:30 to drop off a company truck at work. Phone records show that on the way, Dix called his wife on his cell phone at exactly 10:49. Then again at 11:10. Sometime after that, Dix picked up his mistress, Lou Payette, and drove her to Pacific Scales where they both worked. They parked, talked for a while, and said goodbye at 11:40 a.m. So the RCMP could change their suspect or change the time of death. They decided to change the time. Your officers decide that the murders took place between 10 and 11 a.m. in the first instance. They change the time later between closer to 12 o'clock.
That's right.
It sounds like your investigators picked a time that was convenient for them to point the finger at Jason Dix.
Well, that's your right as well as your viewer's right, as well as anybody's right to think that, because we determined that that's when the deaths occurred, between those time frames you mentioned.
But there is no evidence.
Well, you either accept it or you don't.
But even moving the time of death to around noon didn't help the Mounties. Shortly after going into the office, Dix got a call from his wife to say that she was on her way to pick him up. When your wife called you and you hung up, how much time did you have before she showed up?
Between 30 and 35 minutes.
You've driven that route a number of times.
Yeah, every day.
30 to 35 minutes. So picture this. Dix would have to drive from Pacific Scales to the paper plant. A return trip the police themselves timed at 26 minutes. Then pull out a gun, round up the men, kill them, and drive back to meet his wife. All in about a half hour. Dix's lawyer, Peter Royal, says it would be impossible because Dix would have to take the time to do one more thing, clean up.
These were execution-style killings with the gun pressed to the head. On at least 5 of these shots, there were contact wounds which would cause considerable spray back onto the hands and lower arms of the shooter. He would be covered in blood. There was no such evidence at all. it's so close to being impossible that I don't think that it's worthy of any real credit, that theory.
And that's all the police had, a theory. The Mounties at Sherwood Park had already spoiled the crime scene, and they had ignored headquarters findings about the probable time of death. The only thing that could salvage the case was a confession from Dix. And to get one, they launched the biggest investigation in their history. They called it Operation Cabaya. 13 months, 52 police officers, hundreds of thousands of dollars, with one mission: get Jason Dix to confess. They had watched Dix. They had bugged his car, his wife's car, their bedroom. They had followed Dix and Payette, and they got nothing. So they upped the ante. They sent in an undercover cop to befriend Dix at work. He called himself Brian Anderson. He ran a sting out of this apartment. The lure was easy money. Dix thought he was getting in tight with a criminal gang. Anderson then started boasting of killing someone, hoping to get Dix to brag about the blood on his hands.
Shooting me on the gatepost, that's it. I fucking whacked the guy.
Oh, yeah.
I think you can do shit like we're talking about doing now, and not have a problem with it.
Oh, yeah.
Are you at that stage in your life where
Not a problem.
I don't want to do it? Exactly.
Get in and out, do it fast, do it clean, do it everything like that.
Hanging out with his newfound buddy night after night, Dix tried to impress him with some tough talk of his own.
You know, it has to be carried out to,
Military style,
exactly.
military planning and efficiency, and time to the last second and everything.
Exactly.
And no fucking detail, like not even a fucking gear cap or a fucking hair out of the place. No, you pay money and I'll do it. No problem. Without fucking thinking.
Ordinary Canadians don't sit around talking about whacking people.
That's true. I was doing things that were way over my head, and it was strictly for the money, and I had no intention of doing anything like that.
Can you understand why people hearing those kind of words would think you are a killer and that you probably killed these two men?
Well, yeah, I could see the fact that, you know, I'm talking on the wiretaps to this undercover operator, and I'm talking like, you know, I've done it before or whatever, and sure, yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I was all screwed up at the time, so.
But despite all the booze and bravado, one thing never changed. Dick steadfastly maintained he never killed anyone.
The only way that they could ever do anything, and I know this, is if they decided to frame me, if they decided to do something about it, like, cause, you know, there's no evidence at all, and I never had anything to do with it. See, the problem is that we don't know.
So you'd think the Mounties would throw in the towel. They grew more desperate and came up with a plot right out of the pages of a bad Hollywood gangster movie. They staged a fake murder in front of Dix's eyes, hoping he would panic and confess his role in the Edmonton slayings. Anderson, the undercover cop, took Dix out to a remote spot in British Columbia to visit some criminal associates. Suddenly, as Dix watched from the car, Anderson began shooting into a motorhome. After they fled, Dix was told he now had some dirt on Anderson as a killer. It was time for Dix to fess up to the dirty details about the Edmonton killings. He never took the bait. Once again, no confession. Many people would say that the RCMP stepped over the line on this. Operation Cabaya. Did your guys go too far?
In my opinion, no. People might say, well, that's not entirely appropriate. But what you have to forget here, we're not dealing with a shoplifting case here.
All of this, and it was a bust.
From the perspective that we did not get the results we wanted out of the project, that's correct.
Well, you got nothing from it.
That's
Not a
correct.
single admission from Jason Dix.
That's correct.
When we come back, the Mounties finally arrest Jason Dix and try to browbeat him into a confession.
Are you a fucking parent?
2 years after the murders of James Dieter and Tim Oredzik, the Edmonton RCMP still had failed to nail Jason Dix. They had spied on him, entrapped him. Nothing worked. And they made no secret Dix was their chief suspect. They told his wife, his mistress, his friends and co-workers he was definitely guilty. A lot more people turned against Dix when the police found what they claimed was the murder weapon. buried near Baptist Lake, about 150 kilometers north of Edmonton. Just 2 weeks after the murder, Lou Payette was back in Dix's life and invited him to spend a weekend at a friend's cabin. The gun was found along with 3 other weapons, greased, wrapped and buried in a toolbox. The police say Dix buried the guns when he took a walk alone that weekend for about 20 minutes.
I didn't bury any guns. I did take a walk in the woods to go and make a telephone call to my wife. And I did. And that's reflective in the telephone records.
You got to admit that 2 weeks after the murders, in which you're a prime suspect, you picked the worst spot in Canada to have a vacation. The very spot that the murder weapon is buried.
I think it's a huge coincidence, but there it is.
It all sounds quite damning for Dix, until you consider this. The RCMP searched the property several months after Dix visited Baptiste Lake and found nothing. It was only when they went back a year and a half later that the toolbox was uncovered. Anyone could have buried the guns there in the meantime. And as it turns out, the property at Baptiste Lake and the guns had a very curious history. The guns were among 44 weapons stolen in Vancouver 7 years earlier. Some of the guns from the heist were used in an armed robbery by criminals who had ties to the brother of the previous owner of the Baptiste Lake property. Maybe they buried the guns. And the gun may not even be the murder weapon. The RCMP's own forensics expert could only say there was nothing to say it wasn't the gun and not enough to say for sure it was. But it was good enough for the Mounties. On July 10, 1996, almost 2 years after the murders, the RCMP finally arrested Jason Dix. Now the police had Dix on the hot seat. He waived his right to a lawyer and agreed to an interrogation.
What do you think of that? Pretty rusted up, eh?
Nothing to say.
Jason,
A grueling 11 hours. 6 different police officers tried to crack him.
Jason, think about something. Reach right down into the depths of your soul, your heart. So you know what, Jason? That's the murder weapon. That's what killed those 2 guys over at the plant. Of course you know that, because that's the gun that you used.
Until they seem to crack before he does.
On the advice of my lawyer, I have nothing further to say.
Are you a fucking parent? Ah! I asked you a fucking question. I'm a man. Don't fucking insult me. Did you understand what I said?
On the advice of my lawyer, I have nothing further to say.
Fucking answer me, you fucking parent!
It was horrible, absolutely horrible. I was pretty well petrified, scared. I just sat in one spot and repeated what I was told to say.
Dix consented to lie detector tests. The results were inconclusive. But the police lied. They told his wife and mistress that he failed a test. They told witnesses that he was a psychopath and that they had hard proof he committed the murders. Is it practice for investigators to lie to witnesses?
No, but I qualify that with yes, sometimes it does occur. There are times, yes, when during an investigation, and I'm not saying you might tell people something that there's no, I guess a lie is perhaps, no, I don't really, a lie is such a harsh term. You might tell them a mistruth.
So when your investigators tell people that he didn't pass the lie detector test and that they have hard evidence, fingerprints, hair samples, directly linking him to the murders, and those are all lies.
Well, I suppose if you use the strict definition of the English language, they are lies. But I prefer to call them mistruths that facilitate an investigative process.
Listen, James, I tell you, there's a couple of things I need to ask you about.
As if mistruths weren't bad enough, the police even interrogated Dix's 4-year-old son, James. But the bewildered boy was no help.
Are you a smart boy?
Mm-hmm.
Are you really smart? Did your dad kill somebody?
I never been there.
Like, how did he kill him?
I didn't with him. I wasn't with him.
Oh, so nobody's told you.
It was too much for Dix. He tried to commit suicide.
I lost my wife. I lost my kids, which I haven't seen in a very long time. I guess I lost my reputation as a, you know, all the things at the police and what I've gone through. A lot of the things, I can't blame anybody but myself.
Is Jason Dix responsible a bit for the downfall of Jason Dix?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, with the lying and the affair, you know, if I hadn't done any of these things, you know, they wouldn't have even looked at me.
And the nightmare wasn't over yet. The police had no confession from Dix, so they turned to jailhouse informants to help them out.
I can't remember if he said I killed him or I wanted to kill him or take care of him, you know, is what I'm pretty sure he said.
If Informant X's memory is a bit foggy, that's to be expected. He's a drug addict with a long criminal record, and he can't be identified because he's under witness protection. Dix comes into prison, you see him, you call the cops, and you say, "Here's my ticket, out of here, out of jail."
That's what happened. I can't deny that. I'd be an idiot to sit here and say, oh no. Yeah, I gave them information. I repeated what he told me.
The bottom line is that you're a professional snitch, you're paid to be a stool pigeon and give the police what they want, even if it means maybe exaggerating a bit or making things up.
If the judge wants to think that I'm a liar, let him think that. If 1 million people want to say I'm full of shit, go ahead. There's one sitting right in front of you that knows the truth, along with Jason Dix. And this is the truth.
Apparently, even the police didn't trust Informant X. When they gave him $500 to help pay a fine, they followed him to court to be sure he paid it instead of buying drugs. And a second informant admitted in a letter to Dix that he had lied to the police about a confession. "When I'm done, no judge will believe a jailhouse rat. I was trying to play the pigs by telling them what they wanted to hear." Did the RCMP give any of these informants lie detector tests?
To my knowledge, no. And
But the RCMP insisted that 50 other witnesses take lie detector tests. Why not the informants?
they had every reason to believe they were telling the truth in regards to the Dix involvement. I'm not going to stand before you and say that these informants were Mother Teresa. Like, I'm not that stupid. Like, don't get me wrong. It boils down to a level of trust.
But trust in the police and the prosecutors was sorely tested when the Jason Dix case finally went before the courts. An already shaky case collapsed because of this letter. It was purportedly from a jailhouse pal to Dix, offering to babysit Lou Payette. In other words, keep her from testifying. The police and the prosecution used this letter to help keep Dix in jail without bail for almost 2 years. But guess what? It was a fake, written by the Mounties to entrap Dix. Little surprised the judge agreed when an embarrassed Crown Attorney's office asked that the case against Dix be dismissed for lack of evidence. On September 4th, 1998, after spending 22 months in jail, Jason Dix walked out a free man.
Mr. Dix, how do you feel today?
I feel wonderful. It's been a very long time.
But while Dix celebrated with his parents, the victims' families were bitter, convinced the killer was set free.
You have to just shake your head and go, I just cannot believe it.
Stephanie Oridzik was left a widow to raise her young family alone.
There wasn't enough evidence. He wasn't acquitted because he was innocent. He was acquitted because there wasn't enough evidence to convict him.
Do you still believe that Jason Dix is the killer?
90% of me would say yes. Another 10% would say there is loopholes, there is holes in the story. If Jason did do it, life will take care of him, and it will not be nice.
Jason Dix knows a lot of people think he should still be in jail, and he'll soon be back in court. He's filed a $15 million civil suit for malicious prosecution against the RCMP. The Mounties at the Sherwood Park detachment are not worried, says Inspector Peter Wildarczyk.
Did Jason Dix commit these murders?
In my opinion, in my own personal opinion,
Yes.
yes.
Based on what proof?
The courts, when deciding a case, have to deal with a burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. I don't have that standard. I just have to know some facts, speak to people, and form my own opinion.
It doesn't matter to you that the judge dismissed the case?
That still never changed my perception.
Did you kill James Dieter and Timo Redzik?
No, I did not.
A lot of people think you did.
That is true. There's a group of people out there that still believe it, and equally there's people out there that believe that I had nothing to do with it.
And what do you say to people who still think you did it?
What can I say to them? I mean, the facts are all there. These people have it in their head, and I don't think you're ever going to change it. Unless they caught the actual persons or persons responsible, it might change things.
But that is unlikely ever to happen. The Mounties aren't looking for the real killer of James Dieter and Timo Redzik. They say they already got their man, even if they can't convict him.